I can't believe that it's already been 1 month into 2026 and these are the 20 most played games on Steam Deck right now for the month of January. This list is based on what people are actually playing and we're breaking it down with real Steam Deck OLED performance, frame rates, battery life and how these games actually feel to play on the handheld. Without further ado, let's jump in. Starting at number 20, Hollow Knight is still one of the best examples of a perfect Steam Deck game. On the OLED it runs flawlessly at 90 frames per second with max settings and the battery life is excellent, usually landing between 6 and 7 hours. It looks incredible on the OLED display and barely puts any strain on the system. At 19, Elden Ring continues to hold strong. Running on medium settings you typically see around 40 to 45 frames per second and locking it to a 45 FPS cap gives a very smooth experience, and battery life on the OLED sits at roughly 2.5 hours. This patch comes in at number 18. This one is extremely well suited for the Steam Deck. It runs at default settings with a locked 60 FPS, however the cinematics are actually 30 FPS and the whole game is pretty much rendered in 30 FPS, so you can play it in 30 without any issues. It will last you for about 5.5 to 6 hours of battery life on the OLED. The game runs really well on the system. It doesn't require much gameplay actually, and I think it's perfect for longer relaxed sessions. At number 17, Hogwarts Legacy. I guess people can never get enough of Harry Potter. The game is still very demanding, but it's playable on the Steam Deck. Using a low to medium settings mix with FSR enabled, you're looking at around 30 to 40 FPS depending on the area. Battery life is fairly short at about 2.5 hours, but once you get the settings dialed in, it's a pretty solid handheld experience. The Binding of Isaac Rebirth lands at 16 and remains a Steam Deck staple. On the OLED it runs at locked 90 frames per second on max settings and delivers excellent battery life, usually between 7 and 8 hours, and you can play it in short sessions, and I guess this is why it's always installed for so many players. At 15, Hollow Knight Silksong continues to shine. It came out last autumn and it runs at full 90 FPS on max settings, stays incredibly stable and gives you more than 6 hours of battery life on the OLED. It's extremely well optimized and feels fantastic in handheld form. It also looks amazing on the OLED display. At number 14, Fallout New Vegas has made a big climb thanks to season 2 of the show currently running, and the game is running at max settings. It holds 60 FPS and delivers around 4.5 hours of battery life on the OLED. For an open world RPG of this era, it runs remarkably well and still feels great today. We might actually be getting a remaster of Fallout 3 and New Vegas, but you didn't hear that from me. I guess we have to wait until the end of the show and see how that goes. At number 13, Cyberpunk 2077. Using the Steam Deck preset with FSR set to quality or balanced, it runs mostly at 30 FPS, often pushing slightly above that and occasionally hitting the 40s or even 60s outside dense city areas. I think it's best enjoyed at 30 however, and battery life is about 2.5 hours, so it's not battery friendly, but the experience itself is still very solid. At 12, Red Dead Redemption 2 remains one of the most impressive games you can play on the Steam Deck. Using mostly medium and low settings with ultra textures, it runs at around 30 to 40 FPS, sometimes even 50, and it gives you roughly 2.5 hours of battery life on the OLED. Visually, it still feels incredible to play this on a handheld. If you guys are enjoying this content so far, you should know that I also cover Steam hardware, Steam Deck performance and other handhelds type of content, and if you're into that kind of stuff, you should consider subscribing. Hades sits just outside the top 10. On the OLED, it runs at 90 FPS on max settings and gives you around 5 to 6 hours of battery life. It's smooth, it's responsive, and still one of the best feeling games on Steam Deck. At number 10, Cult of the Lamb has surged this month. I think there's some new content for it and it's actually very heavily discounted right now. On max settings, it can run at around 80 FPS, but battery life drops to about 2 hours and 20 minutes, and I prefer actually locking it to 60 FPS. It improves efficiency, pushing battery life closer to 2 hours and 45 minutes, even 3 hours, while still feeling pretty smooth to play. Arc Raiders holds number 9. On Steam Deck OLED, it runs best with lower settings and a 30 to 40 FPS target, and I wouldn't really go fighting other players in this game on my Steam Deck, but if I were to just play it solo and try to avoid other players, it's still a pretty good experience. Now battery life typically lands at around 2.5 to 3 hours, which is expected for an online shooter of this scale. At 8, Balatro continues to dominate playtime. It runs at 90 FPS, but you realistically don't need anything more than 30 FPS, and actually it makes sense to lock it to 30 FPS because that will significantly boost battery efficiency. On the OLED, you can expect around 6 to 7 hours of battery life, making it dangerously easy to lose entire evenings to this game. Bow X Pit comes in at number 7. Running at max settings with locked 60 FPS, it stays pretty smooth and responsive. This is a new game for me, but it's right up my alley for games to play on the Steam Deck. It's just very addictive and you can go for just one more run. And battery life on the OLED sits at around 5 hours, which is pretty solid for a fast-paced survivor / bullet heaven type of game like this. At number 6, Spire remains one of the best games to play on Steam Deck. You can run it at 90, 60 or even 30 FPS with barely any power draw. Battery life on the OLED regularly hits 7 to 8 or even 9 hours without even thinking about it, and you can just jump in for 1 or 2 runs at a time. At number 5, Fallout 4 continues to climb, again, most likely due to the popularity of the show, and using a medium to high settings mix, you'll see between 40 and 60 FPS depending on what you're doing, and battery life on the OLED is roughly 2.5 to 3 hours, which is solid for a full open world Bethesda game. The 4th spot goes to Hades 2. Hades 2 refines everything that made the original game great. It's running at 90 FPS on high settings, it stays impressively stable even during intense fights, and battery life on the OLED lands between 4.5 and 5 hours. At number 3, Baldur's Gate 3. With a low to medium settings mix, you can expect around 30 FPS most of the time, and the native Linux build improves performance overall, though Act 3 can still push the hardware and cause dips below 30. Even so, many players have completed the entire game on Steam Deck, and it seems a lot of people are still playing it month after month. At number 2, Stardew Valley remains a Steam Deck legend. It runs at 90 FPS, delivers more than 8 hours of battery life on the OLED, and you can stretch it even further by locking it to 30 FPS and push it past 10 hours of battery life. This is just handheld gaming perfection right there. And finally, at number 1, once again, Megabonk. It runs at 90 FPS most of the time, though it can dip into the 60s when the screen fills with enemies. Battery life on the OLED reaches up to 4 hours, and despite the dips, it remains a very fun and responsive handheld experience. That's the top 20 most played Steam Deck games for January 2026 with real Steam Deck OLED performance in mind. If you guys enjoyed this video, consider leaving a like, subscribe for more Steam and Steam Deck content, and let me know, have you played any of these games this month? Let me know what else you picked up and played on your Steam Deck. I'd love to hear about some new games. If you want to see more performance breakdowns for the Steam Deck, don't forget to join my Steam group and follow the Steam Curator page where I share every review I do for games on the Steam Deck. Thank you guys for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.